And we're live.
Hey, what up? Matthew Ventures here, coming at you with another YouTube video. As you guys know, I'm the top tier best game developer in all the country. My name's Matthew Ventures. I've had like 40,000 internships, and I'm coming at you with another one. I'm now interning at I'm gonna dab on all these companies because I'm so good at internships. Check out my Google Doc. My Google Doc's got your hot tips for if you want to get an
My
internship.
book.
I got you. Check out the link in the description. Check out my book. It's coming out soon. I'm making a book as well about gaming. That's what I got to say, Matthew Vent.
Thanks, Matthew. Actually, I'm only on my 11th internship right now, so I know that's still a lot, but it's not 40. I'm not that old. So we got some questions from a fan of ours, Ariel. Um, I think we should. I love doing videos like this. I just think we should do them. But Scott's like, no, don't fake it. Wait till we get real questions, and then we can do a thing.
Because okay, to explain the background of that, Matthew once wanted to do a Q&A, and he was wanting to do Q&A where we made up questions from fake people, and I was like, that's just really sad. Like, oh, Josie from blah blah blah
You know
asked
what? You
us,
know
and
what
then,
though? Actually,
yeah.
I was watching this vlog of Johnny Sins. Funny enough, and
Wait, isn't that a porn star or no?
yes, it is. And he was like, and I heard one of you guys asked me, "Where's my merch?" Just kidding. None of you guys asked that, but here's the link. So
That's good.
I think it's cute. All right. So what are we talking about? So yeah. So she said. So we've actually gotten a lot of questions, but they've been directed to the wrong places of the internet.
Oh,
So for example, there was a Reddit post that was like, "Hey, how do I make a game like No Stranger?" And Scott just randomly found it. So it's cool that like we're inspiring people to do this stuff. And I want to make like more YouTube tutorials to help people make games. But yeah, me and Scott are here to answer some questions that we got. So here's the first question. Hey, Scott and Matthew, I have some questions to ask you about BVP. What is it like being an app developer? All right, so Scott can tell you all about that.
you want to take the first question? I'll take this. Or do we want to have an order with it, or what do you want to do?
Well, you know, I think whoever has something to say should just go. It doesn't need to be in a certain order. So what's it like being an app developer? From my perspective, um, you know what? There's lows and highs, I would say. And if anything, you're just building an infrastructure so that the lowest lows are just a little bit higher. And the highest highs are just boosted a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
I feel like that was the vaguest answer.
I feel like
you
no, because
could
there's way
you could have put that answer on anything. It was like, what's it like being a professional boxer? There's the lows, there's the highs, and sometimes you're trying to get the lows a little bit higher. Like
okay, all right, so that was a bad answer. Scott, what do you think?
what's it like being an app developer? You know, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's in between. No, for to be honest with you, I think being an app developer is very cool. One thing about it is you're able to get your thing out to the people with no barrier, especially if you're an independent app developer like Matthew and I are, where it's like, hey, we're able to make something and just put it out there. That's very different than, let's say, you wanted to make like $100 million movie or $100 million game or something like huge, you know? Like we make very small kind of intimate games that we're able to put out there that anybody can access via the Google Play if Google doesn't reject us, via the
Yeah,
Google Play Store
yeah.
or
So
Apple.
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, there is positives and negatives. So it's really awesome that we can express ourselves however we want. The negative, though, of being an app developer is there's two storefronts to distribute an app versus the other games, right? So there's the Play Store for Android, and there's the iOS store, the App Store for iOS. Then there's also the Windows Store for Windows phones, but nobody has a Windows phone, so we don't talk about those
Well,
guys.
some people probably have a Windows phone. We don't want to
Some people.
push
I
it.
had a Windows phone, and there were no
Yeah.
apps there because nobody's
Oh, all right.
developing for the
Well,
Windows.
maybe that's an opportunity rather than a place to
Maybe it is an
insult. You
opportunity.
know.
Yeah, it's all premium apps because you have to buy it if you want to play. Um, it's also because probably a lot of ad mediators don't want to service them. But so long story short, that kind of sucks because the storefront controls what goes out. So for example, me and Scott have had a little bit of a difficult time working with Apple trying to get NSA Intern approved, and we're very disappointed about that because we want to get the game to you guys. So we're gonna try our best to update it and change it. We have a bunch of updates we're gonna do now for the Android version, and then once those are done, and it's like 100% Android done, we're gonna go to iOS and we're gonna try again. I'm gonna contact some friends and see what we can do.
And I just want to say here too, like, what's it like being an app developer? Like, it's such a huge question because there are so many different types of apps. There's so many different types of app developers. You know what I mean? Like Matthew and I can speak towards what it's like being an indie team of two people who work part time on games, like indie games and serious indie games, like that take their narrative like, well, not we're not always serious, but you know what I'm saying. Like we're not. It's more narrative driven mobile games rather than kind of like a Flappy Bird. No disrespect to Flappy, but it's just different. So that's kind of what we can speak to. But being an app developer is so diverse in terms of what it can be like. You could work for a major corporation and be an app developer. You could work for the government and be an app developer. Like there's so many different ways that you can be an app developer that it's hard to say. It's almost like saying like, what's it like being a writer, or what's it like being a insert X thing. And I think that Matthew's answer, like even though I made fun of it, kind of speaks towards that, is that it is true. Like it is kind of like anything else in a lot of ways.
Well,
And that there's a lot of variety in it.
I'll say what's unique to app development is two things. The first that stands out to me is just you can reach a lot of people really easily,
Yes.
especially if your app like hits it big or if you want to put some money behind an advertising campaign. And the second thing is it does require a technical component. In order to be an app developer,
yes.
I think you need to know a little bit of programming, and obviously I handle that for our team. But I think if you're going at it alone and you've never, and like maybe you're an amazing writer like Scott, but you don't really know how to use Unity, I think you're going to have a little bit of a hard time doing apps, you know. So I do think there's a little bit of a hurdle there. Whereas if you know how to write, you could just write a book, no problem. Or so I would think.
Oh, yeah, it's not no problem.
No, not no problem.
If you're Stephen King, no problem. He's just shitting out
Stephen
books.
King.
But
Wow. Stephen King, he doesn't even know where they're coming from. Okay, here, let's hit the next question. So the next question is, how often do you guys have to work together?
Well, I almost it has a connotation to get about it, right? Because it says like it's not how often do you guys work together; it's how often do you guys have to work together. It's like we probably work together way more than we have to work together. You know, like
yeah. So me and Scott met in high school. We've been good buds.
Meet in high school.
Oh, that's not true. When did we meet?
Middle school.
We met in middle school. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you didn't leave a good impression back then.
That's what I'm saying. Like, oh, we didn't meet until 2 years ago. Like, what the hell? All right.
Yeah, so we met when we were in middle school, and we've been best buds ever since. We went to Korea together on a backpacking trip, and I have to say, okay, there are questions later about how we deal with problems between us, so we don't need to get into that yet. But how often do we hang out? I'd say me and Scott have a call like this, like I did a recording, actually, a YouTube video I just posted of like us just like talking about updates we have to do. We have something like that probably every 3 days, maybe. It depends. Like,
It depends. Yeah. It depends. If it's like an important thing is happening, there have been times where we talk every single day. You know what I mean? Like if it's like something where it's like very necessary for us to be in constant communication. But generally speaking, like if it's a way lighter period, it may be once a week. Because Matthew, and that doesn't mean we're only working on it once a week. That just means that's when Matthew and I are touching base with one another. I mean, the game is very collaborative. A lot of like the writing and the design, a lot of the things that go into it. So it really requires a lot of communication, but it also requires a lot of like letting the other person do their thing, if that makes sense. Like and giving them the freedom to really have fun with it and do it and explore something, and then coming together to really look at it and then provide scrutiny and feedback, and then going back to it's really like the long story short of that is when we don't have to work together, like it's kind of like early on in the project, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, even in like the very early stages because we're just forming it. And then when we're going to like launch something, it may be every day or and then generally speaking, probably every, like Matthew said, every 3 days is a good average.
Yeah, there's a lot of handoffs. So I might do play tests with people, then I send the video to Scott. He reviews it, gets like notes that he thinks of things we're going to change. Then we have a meeting like the one I recorded, and right now we're in a spot where it's like I got a ton of work I got to do, and we're just waiting on me to get it done.
Yeah.
You know. All right, next. Do you guys ever run into problems while coding?
Yes, while I'm coding, this is a great question. So because sometimes when I code, I just like I run into all these problems, and Matthew is not helpful at all when I run. No, I'm kidding.
Scott has broken the build many times.
I think I
He
probably create more problems for the code. Anyway, go ahead, go first.
so yeah, I mean, there's definitely problems. We have a workflow that we try to accommodate our strengths. So for example, I try to prevent Scott from having to deal with any merge conflicts, which is when two people change something at the same time. You need to tell whatever your code version control system is what should happen. So for example, if there's a text file and I say a certain sentence, Scott changes a word in that sentence, but then I change that word into something different. Which word should it be? We have to tell the computer that, and it's kind of complicated. So we try to have Scott like not change main.unity at all, but he always winds up changing it. And then we look at his changes list, and he's like, "Well, it turns out I did change it. What do you know?" So then we have to revert it, and it's a mess. But but it's okay, and it's only two of us, so it's pretty manageable. Um, Dialog is really hard to debug. We use Dialogger, which was a Unity resource, and what's tough was that like it's really hard to see if the lines between different text nodes were missing. So the Excel sheet format, which we've been using for translations, has helped with that a little bit. Um, and then yeah, I'd say the biggest problem I face on the coding side is with integrations of other technology. So for example, I'm working on my code, I know it works, but when I need to get another person's code into the game, for example, to give us ads, so if I'm going to use HeyZap, which is our ad mediator, and I need to put in their code into my code, sometimes that integration process doesn't work well because the two different code bases aren't always friends. So that's usually when I run into the worst problems. Also, dealing with anything related to Apple, it's just generally a hard time, and it takes a very long time to upload to Apple versus the Play Store. So it's just like it's a lot of loading.
I don't code, but I don't know if that was made clear. But what I would say from like the non-coding perspective of the team, oftentimes if Matthew ever has an issue, I almost know what it's going to be. It's whenever there's like a rare exception. Like let's say in messages, there's a super like this is what we're dealing with right now. There's a super long message. And like Matthew will hate that because it's like, oh man, why did you have to write this one super long message? Like because Matthew will create a system for messages that can handle the vast majority of them, but when there's like an outlier, one that's like way different than the other ones, I know for a fact Matthew's going to be like, what the hell? Like, why do I have? Because you almost have to create a whole system for that one unique case, which I know you don't like doing. Not that you don't like doing it, but it almost is like, what is there a way to incorporate this in the system that already exists?
Yeah, that's always hard. It's always better to reuse stuff when you can. To make something from scratch, it always takes the most work. Okay, and then I guess we'll add a question then for Scott. She didn't. Well, she may have asked this in her head. She might say, "Do you guys ever run into problems while writing the story?" What would you say to that?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, there's so many things that like don't work. Like you'll write like like just even the creating of it. First off, it is a lot of the time the stories kind of I don't want to say they create themselves because that sounds a little pretentious, but like you kind of just have to explore, which is a process. Like it's a real process. Like you'll write a character, write a story, and then I'll show it to Matthew, and he'll be like, "Yeah, this isn't clicking. This isn't clicking." And then ultimately, a lot of times I'll actually we agree, we actually see it eye to eye, disagree on changes. But what was I going to say? Is that you'll just end up changing things all around. Like so, we have so many but it's almost like I wouldn't. You could call them problems, but it's almost like challenges is how I would view them. And it's like they're kind of fun to overcome. Like putting together a story, sometimes it's like putting together a puzzle, and it's like sometimes you have pieces that are not fitting correctly, and you kind of need to axe them and make new pieces. So those are kind of the problems is those pieces that don't fit, and sometimes those pieces are beautiful, you know what I mean, that don't fit. They're just like so fun to look at, and like they have a really cool design on them, and you don't want to get rid of those pieces. So ultimately what I do is like I just take them, put them to the side, and then when Matthew's not looking, I just kind of like sew them into the puzzle.
Yeah, we've
um
had missions that we've like created as a result of like pulling from other missions. Like with Nikki
yeah.
Cage, we had like some stuff where we were grabbing other things. Yeah. Okay. Right on. Um, okay. So how do you deal with problems in the team in a calm and civil manner? My tech class last year had a problem with that. LMAO.
Not Matt's tech class, the Ariel's tech class.
Right. That's what she said. So how do we deal with problems in a
I,
calm and
I
civil manner?
I could speak on this if you, because I've thought a lot about this. I think Matthew taught me how to deal with problems way better, especially part of a team. Because I used to get very angry at Matthew, and not like, well, I wouldn't say I yelled at him, but I definitely was very passionate in my responses to him. And excuse me. And what I kind of learned was that just because I may be yelling or I may be passionate about it, it doesn't mean that Matthew isn't just as passionate about it. It's that Matthew is doing a better job at kind of calming his temper or calming his kind of attitudes because he knows that, hey, yelling at each other is really not going to get us to a more logical place. And sometimes that emotion is necessary. Don't get me wrong. Like sometimes people like, if that needs to get out, whatever that feeling is, but ultimately, if you're trying to like create a really pragmatic solution to something, sometimes yelling when you're in a really emotional state, you're not able to actually work on the problem. You're actually bringing in other problems into that situation. So let's say like I'm mad that Matthew's taking a long time to do an update, right? Or something along those lines. And then I start getting mad over something else. A lot of times when you start yelling, I'm bringing in those emotions about being mad about an update into the other thing. And it's more just kind of a symptom of larger communication problems than it is anything else. So what I would say is keep your cool, remain calm, try to be an adult in the situation, address how the other person's feeling. Don't like totally dismiss how they're feeling. Facts don't care about your feelings, but people do. So like they care about feelings. So like you have to acknowledge them and you have to not deal with them, but like really try to figure out where they're coming from. And then sometimes just leave. And I know that sounds weird, but like if somebody's like berating you and making you feel inferior and all of this, like you do not have to put up with that. Like especially in a team like Matthew and I's, like you could just leave. And then ultimately what's going to happen is like after some time, if you get some sleep, you're no longer tired, you're no longer hungry. Matthew just went to go eat, I guess. I can't see him right now, so it sounds like he just left the room and then came back. But
No, I'm here. I muted my thing.
okay, gotcha. Like coding. Once you get like deal with like the physical things, if that makes sense, like tiredness, hungriness, maybe there are other emotional issues going on, and then come to the conversation when you're in a more rational state. So I know I said a lot, but the long story short of that is don't yell. If you're yelling, address the yelling or take a break, come back to the problem later.
Um, yeah, I think those are all good pieces of advice that have worked for our team. I think another thing is just thinking about trying to get away from the emotions of it and just think about like what is the objective differences. So, for example, I think I'm trying to think of when Scott was talking, I was trying to think of big problems that we've kind of had a debate over, and I think one of the biggest ones was that originally the idea for NSA intern was to go into missions and just kind of see someone's story and decide yes, no, are they a terrorist? And one of the issues that I felt we could improve on was that there's no real incentive to go back. And so I thought as a game mechanic, we could submit different evidence to have like a different outcome. But that was going to require a lot of work on Scott's part in order to make what came out to about 9 different endings for each mission, which is a crazy amount. Um, and that's what we did, and it was a lot of work for Scott. And I don't know if we really like 100% capitalized on it, but I think it did provide value to the player. And I think how did I go about showing that? I guess like I just kind of I don't know how I changed Scott's mind about that. I guess I just said like trying to show it from the player's perspective, like ways that like, I don't know. Scott, do you remember that at all? I'm trying to
Yeah,
think,
I mean,
or other examples of
yeah.
like how we what we argued about or changed our mindset.
I mean, the riddles was a thing. Was a big thing
Oh
on No
yeah,
Stranger One. And
riddles.
then
You don't like the riddles on NSA Intern either.
oh yeah, that's funny. It's like Matt. I wanted the riddles in No Stranger, and I think Matt got back at me by putting riddles into NSA
Oh,
Intern.
yeah. I
Um,
didn't like the riddles in No Stranger. I wanted them to all be optional, and I think that's what we went with. And then
yeah,
Scott doesn't like the riddles in NSA Intern because he doesn't like poetry, and they
I
all have
like
to rhyme.
poetry. Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but it's just a lot of work, and it's not like core game content. It's hint stuff, which is kind of auxiliary. So I could see how that's not as fun. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to say something, also compromise, 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 but also don't compromise, don't compromise, don't compromise. And I know that sounds very contradictory and all that, but like compromise when you know it's not going to be the end of the world, but also don't compromise if it's something that's really important to you. Like and be able to articulate why it's important to you. For example, like Matt, I'll just like examples are probably helpful. So like there were messages where Matthew was like, "Hey, I would prefer if this wasn't like a block of text, right?"
yeah,
And then this
Gordon's
person was sending
email
a block
from
of text.
Amara.
Oh, well, no, I wasn't referring to that. I was more referring to Lee's message with like Kimberly. There's
Oh
like
yeah,
block of text. And I think Matthew wanted to cut that out for a second. And I was just like to him, because it would have been easier to show visually. But like that was very important to me because that's a strong story thing, right? Because like when you send a block of text, that's something that means something. Like when you send this giant block of text to somebody. So if that was important to you, keep it in there. And but if it's not like super important, like the riddles thing, it's like just suck it up. Like just do it, especially if it's going to help the other person and make their life easier. And here's the thing too, just try it out. You know what I mean? Like for example, the outcomes with the missions. That was something I was initially hesitant to do, but I think I thought to myself like, hey, I'll just do it for one mission and see how it feels and see if this is working. And then it ultimately became the core loop of the game. Like that's ultimately what NSA Intern is now. So it ultimately was a really good decision idea on Matt's part. And then I was initially hesitant to do it, initially reluctant actually. And then I just did the first one. And I was like, oh, this is actually a really dope, really cool idea. Let's do it. So just try it out is what I would say. If it's not the worst thing in the world, you know.
I think with games like you could look at everything and like just keep polishing it. I know the guy for Stardew Valley like kept changing the profile pictures for all these different guys in his game, for all the different NPCs. And I think we have a similar situation. Like I look at some of the messages and like the text could still be better, like how the text boxes are scaling. That's like a really hard thing to do for some reason. And or like the loading time, we gotta get that down. And it's like you can spend time to get every single thing better, but it just takes time. Um,
Oh,
okay,
sorry to interrupt. Before we go on to the last question, what I would also say is like Matthew and I choose to work together, which is really different than if you're in like a tech class and you're forced to work with other people. Like that's totally different. Or if you're in a job and you're forced to work with other people. So like I would say on your side projects, your side hobbies, like choose people who you think you're gonna have a good time with, but also test it out. Like somebody who you may think is like a terrible person may actually be really great working with you, and you may learn more about them, and they may not actually be a terrible person when you make a game with them or something like that. That said, like I wouldn't. I don't want to get you into a 2 year long project with somebody you hate, but like test the water, do something little with them, try to make something with them. And then if you're in a class situation where you're forced to work with other people, just try to make the best out of it. And like if it's the like just do a cost benefit analysis. If this class is only like 3 weeks long, chill the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like just go with the motion of the ocean. Try to fill in the gaps where they're needed. If you feel like the best thing I've ever learned with like group projects, like you just fulfill what role needs to be fulfilled. It's like it's think of it almost like it's Overwatch, right? Like if nobody's playing Mercy, you got to play Mercy. You know, like I get that everybody may want to play Reaper, but like no, you can't let that happen in a group project. So like so I think you should go in there and be this adaptable little bug and kind of like figure out what the group needs. Maybe the group needs a leader. That's your opportunity to really like step up and then take control of the group and make it happen. Maybe the group's communist. Maybe nobody's a leader. Like that's chill too. Make it work that way, you know, and figure out your spot in that kind of collective. But ultimately, it's about kind of finding out what the dynamic of the group is, kind of taking a sense of where everybody's at, and deal with people as people and not just transactionary objects.
Yeah,
You know what I
can I
mean?
jump in there?
This is gonna be a 50-minute video.
I know Scott loves to lecture. I do too. I mean, but so there's this really good book called Peopleware, not software, but Peopleware, and it's about making teams, especially in tech, and how to work with people within that industry. It's a little bit of an older book, but I think it has a lot of good learnings. There's a lot that you could learn from these different tech books. But this is one of the things that I did as an assignment for the class that I was doing. All the
Before
students.
you do that, can you give us like the TLDR of Peopleware? Like if we never
Peopleware.
read it,
Sure, yeah. Peopleware is basically it's just a book about how to get people to work together on software. I don't
like
know.
is there like a top tip that you learned from it?
Yeah, so here's the top tip. The top tip is it really helps to have time with someone. I think one of the best reasons why I get along with Scott is just because we've had a long history together and we've been through stuff. So we kind of like there's a trust that's developed between us. And one of the ways that Peopleware suggests to kind of kickstart that is just to meet outside of a group setting. And just to what they do in their example is just to cook dinner together before the project. I think having like the team to go cook dinner together is like a really good idea, and I would require all my students to do it because I think it's a great idea. Maybe not to cook if you don't have the resources, but even just to like get a meal outside of class. I think that could do a great help to getting a team to work together. And it's something I've seen a lot at companies I've worked at. Like there's this idea of going on an offsite and like do an escape room together, because even if even if you're starting on a hard project, having done the successful escape room or having been able to cook dinner together, it's like a victory, and victory is cumulative. It's like it'll carry you forward. So if you have a little small victory, that's really awesome because then it can bring you forward. And I think when you're designing your tech, you should try to have like the MVP, the prototype or something, a little victory to get you started and get the ball rolling of success.
That's cool, but also demand that the company pays.
Yeah, demand that the company pay for it. That's a good move.
Because like you don't want to be doing that on your dad. But like in school, I guess you kind of just like ask the people and try to not do it in. I guess try to be careful and not do it in a creepy way because I could really see that coming across wrong. If you're like to your group, you're like, "Hey, who wants to get dinner tonight?" And it's like everybody's like, "What the fuck? Who's this
What
guy?"
the
Um,
fuck? Yeah,
yeah,
don't be
but
weird, man.
don't be weird. Don't be
Okay,
weird.
and most important, okay, so here's the next question. And most importantly, do you guys have fun working together as a team?
Absolutely not. Like every single time when we hang out, I think you could clearly tell even from this video, like Matthew and I, we are just, it's so boring. And it's just, that's one of the things I hate most about working with Matthew is that every time we talk, I just like, I'm just so bored and we never do anything interesting and we never laugh. Like laughing is not, laughing is not allowed. And
Uh,
Matthew has made that a rule. Matthew, I don't know if you guys know, Matthew has rules for the meetings. No cursing allowed, no jokes that are not in the game. Like because Matthew wants all, and it makes sense, right? Because Matthew wants all the, the humor
I
to be
did
in
have
the game.
I did have a no cursing rule because it was getting pretty bad at one point. But no, I think cursing is back on the menu now. Um, Yeah, so I love working with Scott. Me and Scott, he would say we have completely different personalities. I think we have a lot in common. But it's always just fun to like roll out with him to like a party or something. We've been at some of my friends' parties, and it's just great to have my buddy there on an adventure. I hope we do another trip like Korea sometime soon. So yeah, it's a dream come true to be able to work with your friend on like a game. Um, and just to both dedicate that as like our main hobby or a big side project. It's a lot of fun. And Scott does a whole bunch of other really cool projects too, so he's like a really busy guy. You should check out some of his videos. But yeah, it's interesting how we're all just balancing it and doing this in our free time, basically. If we ever made enough money to do it full time, then that'd be really cool. But maybe then it would be less fun. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't want people to think I was. I don't think they would. But yeah, I absolutely was not serious. I mean, it's a blast. Like Matthew and I, like I think it's almost a necessity because the game is not going to be fun if we didn't have some fun in making it. I mean, maybe that's not true, but I feel like it is. I heard what's the guy's name? The guy who makes those Spirited Away.
Oh,
What,
Miyazaki.
is it Miyazaki? Yeah, Miyazaki. He goes, when if my animators don't smile when they draw a happy creature, like when they draw a happy creature, they smile. It makes them happy, draw something happy. And I think like to make a happy, and to add on to that, like to make a happy game and a fun game, you need to have some bit of fun in making it. Like when we read, like when we went through like the Ben Laden mission or whatever, like that's so stupid. Or the Nicky Cage
Ben
mission.
still cracks me up. That's my favorite mission in the game. It's so funny.
It's just so I mean, you just have to have fun with it, and like throughout your game, like for us, for Matthew and I think I'm about to go off on another rant, so get ready for this. But for Matthew and I, it's kind of like the journey. 90% of it, or at least I shouldn't speak for Matthew, but for myself, it's like 80% of it is the making of the game. You know what I mean? Like we laugh, we cry. I'm speaking for Matthew again. I laugh, I cry. He laughs too. He cried. No. Um,
I only
and
cry.
I, well, that's not true.
Well, you know what the thing is
Oh.
though, Scott, our roles have changed over time, but I do think Scott has a lot more work on the front, and I think I've got a lot more work on the back of the project. So, and we do kind of tag team like someone who has the baton in a race where they pass it off to the next person. There's a lot of that going on where
Yes.
different people are handling different things. Yeah. Cool.
But
You want me to? Are we good?
is that all? Is there any more?
Yeah, so this is what she said then. She said, thanks so much for taking the time to answer the questions. I want to study computer programming, especially apps and game making as a bonus. I'm also taking an online coding course. Once again, thank you very much. She said, I never get bored, especially playing NSA Intern.
Hey, NSA
Hey,
Intern, download on the Google Play
download
Store
on the
right
Play
now.
Store. We're going to make it
If you're
better. We're
watching,
working
if
on
you're
it.
watching this video, I assume you've downloaded it. But if you haven't, go ahead. Yeah, we're working on it. We're gonna incorporate really quick, probably some ways for you to get gems or jewels. They're called jewels. In ways without having to pay for them. But don't tell anybody that. That's the secret between you and I, whoever's watching. Um, yeah.
Yeah, we're
So
excited to make that better, and we have no plans at this moment for a future title.
no, 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 I'm not right.
No. Yeah, we just want to really focus, I think, on NSA Intern and No Stranger, and like do things like push notifications, which we don't have right now, and just try to like get the apps that are currently out there to be the best they can be, because I do think they have a high potential to improve.
Yep. The other thing I want to say to Ariel, or Ariel rather, is she's interested in computer programming, especially app and game making. Like I would say, do it. Just this is what we said in a previous video as well. Just get started. That's the best way to make it happen. I mean, you look at some of these people who are so inspiring, like this girl, Angela He, who's making games on her own, and she's killing it. Like she's making these beautiful games by herself. She has like a Medium post, I think, on Medium where she explains like her process and how she got started. Like you can do it. Like you can do it. The game making is such a democracy way. Like you have Toby Fox making Undertale, which is like one of the biggest games ever, and he's one dude. Tell me any other industry where, well, don't tell me that, but like but the point is that app making and game making is an industry where you can really take control of your destiny if you really want to devote yourself to it and make something of it. And the truth is, and this is what I was getting at in my last comment, is like 90% of it you're going to find out is like the making of whatever it is. Like that's where you get the joy, that's where you get the fun. And then the last 10% is kind of the dope part of like having people who like your stuff and making money from it and like that kind of stuff. And that's great too. That's part of the enjoyment, but like you're going to find that 80 to 90% is the making of the actual thing, and it's really hard sometimes, and it
Yeah.
could get really annoying, and some of it's very rote, if that makes sense. Like it's very just kind of repetitive things that you have to do, especially in games. Anything, you have some repetitive stuff in it, but like just put on some music and make it into a little like meditation game. Like
My advice to a programmer is definitely, if you can find the same amount of passion in anything other than video games, you should probably do that instead. Because video games, you're gonna get paid less if you're gonna be a programmer. You would make more if you work at like Facebook or something. And it's just a little bit harder versus some other just general tech company. So I think a lot of the people who make games as a programmer are kind of self-selected, whereas people who are like artists, that's kind of like there are less options for them. Whereas like a programmer, you can do a lot of different things. So if there's something else that could bring you just as much joy, I would consider doing that instead because it's probably going to make you happier. Um,
Are you discouraging her?
I think I think if you're a programmer and you could do and you would be just as happy, then you should do that. Because honestly, for me, it's like I can't find the same amount of joy in anything other than games, so that's why I do it. And if I could do something else, I would because games are a little tough.
And start small.
Yeah, start small. And I got a link for you. Download my book. It's free. tinyurl.com/game-dev-intern. And it's everything I know about how to get an internship, so hopefully it helps you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's free.
And it's free. That's a great price.
Anyway, thank you so much for this question, for these questions,
Yeah.
Ariel.
Or send us
thank you so
more.
much.
We love making these videos, man. It's so much fun.
No, honestly, like any fans of NSA Intern, No Stranger, Black Vein Productions, the cool thing is, and this is where we're gonna this is where Matthew and I curse out all the big game companies that Matthew wants to work for.
No.
And we tell them to just go. But
we always
but
do what's good for the player.
Yeah, the cool thing about being a really tiny indie dev company is that we have this relationship with you guys. So like, feel free, send us any questions you want. You want to ask us what our favorite color is? Be my guest. I'll tell you. Or maybe I won't. Maybe we'll keep some things hidden.
What does DMLM stand for?
What does DMLM stand for?
What
Find out next
mistakes
week.
in Scott's love life inspired No Stranger?
That's very real. Okay, let's end the video now. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Peace out.
Peace.